This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
I guess the bottom line would just be to show integrity and that truly care for all your team members, and so that they will then in turn make you proud by seeking out the training on their own and alleviating that pressure from you as the manager.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with talent development professional Jenn Zeinner. Hello, Jenn. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, Jen.
Yeah, I really wanted to talk to you about onboarding new hires because I know that's something people in my field are starting to need to do more often and may not have that experience. But first, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share your journey in the field of talent development. Did you always know you wanted to be involved in talent development and training?
Okay, yeah, no problem. Yeah, that is actually a fun question that I like answering because I think that I always knew, but I never accepted the fate, if you will, for talent development because I don't think I really even knew what talent development was at the time. When I was in college studying communication studies, I wanted to be a local star on the news. And then a shift kind of took place when I became a single mom during my sophomore year of college. I began to look at life a little bit differently and became more people-centric than self-absorbed. And during my corporate training course at Northern Kentucky University, my professor, Dr. Boyd, he actually introduced me to this world of adult education and talent development and helping people become better professionals. And I noticed the similarities of media stardom, if you will, in the public speaking and corporate training world. I found that I could still reach an audience through this career, but in just a little bit different way. Instead of simply delivering information with no interaction with my audience, I was now going to impact lives through employee development, keynote speaking, mentorship programs, and helping employees advance to become a better version of themselves. And all through this would be done through the platform of corporate training. However, my post-college career, though, it did not start immediately in the training world because I needed to gain real-world experience after being, in college as a first-hand employee. And so I began my career in a less than desirable position, kind of that entry-level position, getting my feet wet through a very intense training program. But I never lost sight of the end goal to become that adult educator. And within 5 years, I was actually working full-time as a sales training and development manager for a Fortune 500 company. So I think it was always there, but it just didn't go in that direction, or I didn't realize it right away.
So you mentioned an intensive training. Was that you receiving training on how to do your job?
I did, yeah. When I worked for enterprise holding companies, Enterprise Rent-A-Car as it's known, they actually put all of their management trainees, as they called us, in through a very intense training program to teach us about the culture of the company, how they wanted each of their branches, because the way that they set up their organization, no matter whether I worked here in Florida or if I went to Ohio to work or if I traveled outside of the United States and went into a branch, I should be able to know how the culture, I should understand the rules and regulations, I should understand standards and procedures, and I should be able to jump in and help out at any of the branches. And so they put each of their employees through this program to teach you all of that so that you can go into any location and it will be run in a very standardized fashion.
Wow, that does sound really intense. And it makes me
it is.
makes me so glad that I asked you to be on today and talk about onboarding because you have that.
Well, I'm privileged. Thank you.
Yeah, that perfect experience. It's great. So just to give you a little bit about where we are, the field of prospect research is just blowing up. It's growing rapidly. And once people have some experience, they're almost immediately sometimes being pulled into a leadership role. They're becoming managers very quickly and with no management experience often. So then They have to go and hire someone. And I know onboarding can be important, but even I'm not really clear about why. I struggle with the same thing. I have not had management training. So if you're a new manager like that and you haven't had time to develop a formal training program like Enterprise has, what are some key things a new manager might do to get new recruits on that learning path, both with the organization, but also, as prospect researchers?
Well, it's kind of a double answer there because especially as a new manager. So I'm assuming, going into that managerial role, they see some value in you and being a manager and get promoted to that level. And then so you kind of have to take your career into accountability. as well as the interests of your employees. And so being a firm believer that, that there's no one that's going to be more interested in one's success than oneself as a manager, it's crucial you take your success in your own hands. So you're going to have to seek that outside help to become that better manager, because there are many tools, networking opportunities, events that you can seek outside of your employer if they don't have an actual training program for you to go through, a management training program such as Enterprise did, that you can still seek out professionals that are doing your job, even if it's not within the same industry. So other successful managers are not having that pride to say, hey, what makes you successful? And what are some tools and tips that you can provide me so that I can bring that into my organization, back to my team? But in the same sense, with my most recent position as the director of learning and development for a 20-year-old company where they did have zero prior training programs in place, that was from whether it was new hire training or a manager training program, there was nothing. And so they've been running normal operating, just zero training. And so employees would get hired and be sent immediately to work with no onboarding, formalized training. Same with managers. They were promoting managers from within because there was a need at a branch. And even if they weren't a branch manager ready, if they were maybe an account manager, you're like, hey, you're running a branch today because you've been successful over here. And that was just a standard procedure. And so these managers are doing as you're speaking. They're just having to fly by their seat of their pants and figure things out. And so again, this comes back to, it's dependent upon the manager to onboard, the new employees to meet his or her standards, not necessarily the company standards at that time. And as the company, begins with the standardized training, as it's being developed, it's suggested that managers continue to keep their employees' best interests in mind. And that's where they're going to have the success, because it's been said many times, especially in the training world, that employees are not quitting their companies, even ones with no training, they're quitting the managers. And so it's crucial that the managers are learning work appreciation language of their employees. And so, which is kind of similar to the love languages. How does each employee learn? Because we all have a learning style and not everyone learns the same way. So we can't dictate to one employee, the next employee, they're led by appreciation. Their appreciation level may be words of encouragement, where the next person may be fed with time off, or they may be fed with, they need a written word, or maybe they need praise, whatever that praise looks like, in order to validate and continue that success for them. And so it's really up to the manager to learn what each of those learning styles and those work appreciation languages of their employees really are, so that they can then show the employee that they're invested in them as an employee and not just that bottom line growth, which in turn is going to then increase the bottom line growth as that manager is seeking outside training as well to be that better employee for them.
So work appreciation language. That's the first time I've heard that phrase. Is there's probably books out there and blog posts on that. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
There are. The work appreciation is actually written by the same gentleman that wrote the 5 love languages. Some people are familiar with that, but definitely in the training world, the work appreciation is the big one, where it goes into, you got your love language of, there's the physical touch, there's the words of affirmation, acts of kindness, acts of service. And so it kind of goes along the same lines, and employees kind of relate the same way that one would in a relationship, whether it be, with a mother-son, romantic relationship, whatever that looks like, it's going to kind of correlate the same way within a working relationship as well.
That's neat. That is very relatable. Not too technical, which is good when it comes to people.
Very much so. Yes. It really just comes down to training, comes down to just people and loving your people, because they're going to listen and they're going to appreciate their manager. If their manager is invested in them, they're going to take that feedback. And especially when they see that their manager truly does understand them and doesn't just try to treat them the same way they treat everyone, they're going to go that extra mile, whether that means seeking outside networking opportunities to better themselves, or outside training, or even bringing feedback back to the manager to help the manager succeed as well within the same team.
One of the things we have seen happening with our association, APRA, is that they've started a leadership track at their conferences, for example, and there's a leadership cohort that they offer now at the international conference. So they have started providing some of those opportunities to network with other managers, which is great. You can't beat that kind of mentoring.
Yeah, those are perfect, because those relationships are going to stay with you. And then as you're attending the events, you're meeting other professionals, other managers that are in similar situations, and then you connect with them on LinkedIn and actually say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. How can you help? Do you have any suggestions? And then you actually end up building that network.
Yeah, I've read a number of places. There's been some other bloggers in my field that talk about, get outside of prospect research, get outside of fundraising, attend a conference that is something different. And here we're talking about training, which is relevant to your work, but it's outside of what we do. So that's great.
It's very true. Yeah, when I was at, and to kind of piggyback on that, when I was actually in sales, because I had to work the entry level, to get the experience. But I found like a niche that I was really successful within the HVAC industry, and I knew nothing about HVAC and about air conditioners. But I was finding that that's where I was being led to sell to. And so in order to be successful in that, I was actually going to networking events for the HVAC world. I was going to their conferences, which is completely not within the sales realm. And you're talking very technical there, but then you become, you add that kind of to your feather to your cap and become more of an asset within that industry. So it does always help to go outside of your comfort zone.
Yes, and collect lots of different skills. You might be a researcher at heart there. It could be.
Yes.
We do the same thing.
I see that.
So one of the other things that doesn't always come as naturally to the typical researcher in our field is really creating that team environment. The work that we do is very individual and independent. So if I'm focused on a research project, I'm really focused on my own pretty much. How can a new manager or an experienced manager, what are great ways to make a new team member feel like they're part of the team?
That's a good question, because it really comes down to integrity. Because now that I've served in several roles in my professional career, I've had that experience of having that bad manager and then that good manager and what makes the difference. And then all the way from being that manager and taking what I didn't want to be, what was role modeled for me. I was like, I don't want to be that manager. And then what was role modeled, how do I want to be the good manager? All the way to serving in senior level executive. I've learned that it all just comes back to one thing, and that's showing integrity within your employees. When you're showing integrity as a manager among your team and you're working alongside them and you're showing them that you do have the experience, that you're not just a dictator, you're not just telling them what to do, but you're actually a true asset to their success. And you see your employee as your customer. And so you've kind of transitioned from that entry level sales representative or whatever that looks like. Now your employees are your customers. And so when your employees feel that and they feel respected and valued by their manager and they feel that you're investing in them and their success, when they're seeing you pursue, further education, they don't see you as feeling like that you know everything, but you're going outside and you're seeking learning opportunities. You're bringing it back to them. You're encouraging them to do the same thing. You're encouraging them to take ownership of their own success and bringing you back learning opportunities and maybe taking leadership roles in an area that you yourself don't, you don't feel that comfortable, but you recognize that your employee is very successful in that particular area, allowing them to take leadership opportunities and do training opportunities and encouraging them and kind of, we call it having subject matter experts. Maybe you have, if you're focusing on the sales world, you have one that can sell maybe you have your team can't open doors as successfully as the next person, but you have one employee that can, maybe having them lead a group on teaching how do I actually talk key performance indicators and what makes them successful. And then so that you increase their confidence within your team as well. So now they're more bought into you and the company. And so together you guys are able to grow and hit that bottom line that ultimately all the organizations are looking for without any training.
Yeah, I love that word, integrity. I feel like with the students that I've encountered, the researchers that are learning new skills, and as a manager myself, one of the things that happens in our field, because there is no higher education degree on it, people come in with all kinds of experiences and all ages. And by showing integrity, we're allowing them to share those experiences with us. I might not have as deep a skill set Securities and Exchange Commission filings and someone else does, or someone else might have commercial real estate experience or farmland. How do we value that? So when we think of that under the umbrella of the word integrity, that really fits.
Yes.
I remember I was at an APRA conference years ago, and someone had a whole presentation on using Trello to manage the onboarding process, because in large institutions, it's complex. Maybe in a smaller organization, it's not as important, but what kinds of free or low-cost tools do you recommend to help keep a team on track with their learning, their continuing learning and onboarding?
That's a good question, because with every organization that I've worked with, the training budget has not always been a large one. And so I have had to stick at the very basic level, which I feel like a lot of organizations, that if the training is not their forte, that's what they're looking for, as they can build that training budget and then learn those training tools and those LMS systems, the learning management systems. And so if you're not in that position to purchase one for your organization to keep track of the learning, One of the many free LMS tools that I was familiar with would be Moodle, and it's used in the education world as well, and it's Moodle. And it's a great starting point for companies that just want to integrate that training into the organization, but just limited on the budget. It has all the basic where you can still create content and feed that out, and you can track your employees' learning progress. But at some of my organizations, we didn't even go that big because that was a little bit too advanced. After I left the Fortune 500 companies and moved into a director of training roles, I did that for a lot of family-owned companies. And so budget was extremely limited, but also with culture. And so I spent a lot of my time changing culture. And so introducing any sort of LMS, even free or not, it was unwanted. And so I had to stick to the basics of Excel. And Excel spreadsheets can go a long way for tracking the growth and employee training hours for your employees learning. And you can kind of see that progression based on the amount of hours that you want to implement and what training they're actually doing. And if you're putting out requirements for training, you can track all of that there. So that's always an easy one to fall back on. But then Moodle is definitely a one that if you're wanting to actually send out training, that's definitely a go-to.
It's interesting because originally at the Institute, we started with Moodle to offer courses. And it is common in higher education where a lot of researchers work. So it's possible they could sort of, create their own course on their institution's software. I wonder if people have thought of that. There may be some internal obstacles to that, but
right.
But looking for a learning management system, LMS, that's lower cost. There are actually so many tools coming out.
There are.
You may not know, but researchers tend to be early tech adopters. So by giving us this language, we can now go out and research and find some low-cost tools.
And a lot of times, and because I don't know the researching industry, but I have found too that a lot of companies, like payroll providers, if they have them, that they actually have relationships with training sources that offer low-cost LMS systems for the company. And you can get a lot of those without any content. If you purchase them without content, they become a lot cheaper because then you can integrate your own content anyway. So it's just worth checking.
Yeah, and it can be pretty simple nowadays to create a video if you have a smartphone.
Yes. So, yeah, exactly.
Lots of ways to track those standard operating procedures for organizations.
Very true.
Well, before I let you go, I'm wondering if you have any great tips for how a team can keep learning and sharing that new learning within the team.
Yeah, that's a good question because that actually comes back to kind of what I mentioned before, and that just comes back to just the integrity and the value that the employees are seeing within their managers and how dedicated are the employees, because as I mentioned before as well, we have to take ownership of our own career, and that includes the employee too. And so if those employees dedicated to their own career, just having that manager that's going to encourage them to invest in themselves, to seek outside networking opportunities, bringing back opportunities, whether it's doing networking events with your own team outside of work, or maybe even taking that break and do it, depending on what the workload looks like. Are you able to do that during work hours and just having a networking building opportunity for the employees to get to know each other? Because sometimes you find that the employees, especially at the company that I was just at, it was a 20-year-old family-owned company, but some of the departments, even working cubicles down from each other, didn't even know each other. They didn't know their names, much less what they did outside of work, who had kids, what drove each person to success. And so by doing a small networking event where each employee can actually sit and talk to each other and get to know each other, and then they can actually start using each other to then talk and learn from. And so like we would have our inside sales team would then able to meet some of our account managers and find out, okay, what are your challenges over here? Why is our communication barrier here? So they were doing actually internal learning themselves because they didn't need any formal learning. They were just finding, in order to sell successfully, I can't have you continue to hold my account. How can I bypass that? And then by meeting and having that friendship within that other department, they were able to bypass that and learn the process of what are the challenges of each of their employees. And so then they were driven to move forward in their own learning and seeking those opportunities and finding, and even as a manager, providing those resources for them as you find training opportunities, whether it's webinars or start to learn, the appreciation languages of your employees. And do they feel appreciated because they want that recognition? So is there any event that we can do where we can recognize that employee to encourage them, that employee they sought out outside training? Let's encourage them now and show them appreciation that we actually care for them and just continue to drive on the success and the individualized need of each employee that you have on your team. And so I guess the bottom line would just be to show integrity and that truly care for all your team members, and so that they will then in turn make you proud by seeking out the training on their own and alleviating that pressure from you as the manager.
I love that you've brought up the social aspect of being a team
Yes.
member. Sometimes in my field, we have just this wide range now of people who are very social and extroverted, but also the very technical and analytical who are all about the work, and I don't need that kind of fluff. But to interact with different departments, and we must interact with our major gift officers, for example, who are out there asking for large gifts to our organizations.
Yes.
We need some social interaction, and maybe supporting those team members who are less comfortable by having that sort of group networking with another department or with the gift officers or development officers. What a great idea.
Yes, it goes a long way. It's incredible.
Thank you so much for sharing with me today, Jenn. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for entrusting me to provide the feedback. I've enjoyed my time.
That was talent development professional Jenn Zeinner. At a time when the field of prospect research is growing rapidly, you might face the prospect of leading a team of researchers. Whether that means you're growing the team by hiring or you've gotten promoted to a leadership position. Managing people is a whole new skill set. I hope you found some key takeaways from Jenn on how to address your team's training needs.